What rough beast its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born.
Hello and welcome to What Rough Beast. I'm Virginia Heffernan. So I've been writing a mini memoir of my political education and evolution and many missteps. Maybe we could call them gaffes on my Substack, and it's free. We are up to part 4, where I finally fall out of love with the right-wing Ayn Rand boys of the 1980s with their clear haircuts and their date rape habits. If you want to check it out, it is ungated at virginiaheffernan.substack.com. So see what you think. Today, my guest is Alastair Smith. He's the Bernhardt Denmark Chair of International Relations at New York University and a professor of political science there too. He has a PhD in political science from the University of Rochester and a BA in chemistry from Oxford. And I bring up the chemistry because Alastair is going to bring some science to the proceedings today and tell us why the underlying reality of America. Now, see, scientists don't live in fragments of national lyrics and Yeats poems. They live under the hood with the money, the mechanics, the periodic table, the reality. So Alastair is going to tell us why this underlying reality of American democracy is sound. And he really thinks that Trump is not going to drive us into the lake of fire with his armed MAGA ICE lunatics and their fleet of gilded F-150s. Alastair Smith thinks we got this, so I had to talk to him. Alastair, welcome to What Rough Beast.
Glad to be with you.
We on this show regularly say that we intend to bear witness to America's demise. We try not to split the difference or mince words when it comes to what we're currently undergoing in the U.S. But you have an idea that we might not be bearing witness to the demise, at least of democracy, and that is something you've held to. You've held to all along, that America is a mature democracy and it is not likely to turn into an autocracy anytime soon. Tell me if anything has done anything to shake your view with that confident hypothesis.
So let me be blunt in the fact that, yes, I think American democracy will survive. But yes, we should be very concerned. And it's precisely because we are very concerned that this won't take place. So it's not like I'm saying we should just sit back and all will be well. Mm-hmm. I'm like, it's because the democracy in the US that we all value is worth preserving that we're going to fight for it. And that's why I think we will be safe, because we will try and maintain the institutions in the US. So I'm not saying we could just, have a cup of tea and all will be well. We should be out protesting and we should pay attention to what's going on. But I think if we do that, we will be okay.
So, yeah, I mean, I like this point that sometimes social science will say, I remember this happening with the overpopulation obsession of the 70s, that India was going to be overpopulated in a minute and a half if there weren't sterilization methods imposed on the population. One thing they didn't take into account is that people also are concerned about overpopulation and start having fewer kids when there are fewer resources. And so I think your point is the threats to democracy are not abstract, like weather threats. They're the threats that people then take to heart and rally in response to, like an immune system.
Right, that's precisely the point. So the way I like to think about political institutions in general is, I don't like this sort of democracy, non-democracy, as if, I find the term democracy very loaded for several reasons. Ask people for a definition of democracy, you'll get 30 different definitions. It's also something that we hand out as a reward. Our friends we call Democrats, and our enemies we call autocrats. And so it's a very charged term. And this idea that we'll just move a tiny little bit and then suddenly everything is a wonderful democracy. So I don't find that a useful way to think about political institutions. The way I like to think about it is think of the number of people that you need in order to survive in power. So if you want to be the president, you need around 22 million votes. The president obviously always gets more, but if you put you just need to win half the electoral college. So you only need basically half the seats, and they're malapportioned. So it's way less than half the population or half the voters that you might think of. But it's still an enormous number. It's tens of millions. If we go to the other extreme, like North Korea, we're talking 100 people maybe are critical to keeping the regime in power. And so, the way I like to think of this is what the policies that are going to make 100 people happy are not the policies that keep 22 million people happy. And so that's a sort of fundamental difference. And then I like to throw in the idea of, well, if I got to keep 100 people happy, I'm just going to provide lavish gifts for these people, because I'm just going to buy them off. I'm going to give them goodies, corruption. That's the norm when you're not beholden to many people. And corruption becomes much less important when you've got to keep millions and millions of people happy. Because if you try and just buy off millions and millions of people with cash, you just run out of cash very quickly. And this becomes even more. And so leaders start doing things that are good for the country. And this particularly becomes the case when countries are economically mature, meaning that we have ways of efficiently providing public goods. We can provide good policy very easily, and therefore people demand that, and it becomes an efficient way. So there's just not a lot of slack in the system. But the reason this leads to democracies being mature is you want to think about what would happen. Let's suppose we halve the number of people that we need to keep happy. So instead of going from like 20 million, we need 10 million. And so the question is, well, the leaders would provide a little more corruption and a little less public goods. But in the US, you want to sit there and think, would it be better to be a political insider? We have my guy running the country, but the leader's not as accountable, versus the other guy that I don't like for whatever policies, but they're going to be more accountable. And the great thing is, when we're in a mature democracy, it's better to be on the losing side in the mature democracy than undermine democratic rules and have your guy in power. And that's sort of the welfare analysis. So,
that's excellent. So wait, slow that down for me. I need to think that through. Just restate what you said, but as if to a child.
Yeah. So you want to think about whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. Let's suppose you're a Democrat. Would you prefer to have a Republican in office but maintain full democracy, or would you sooner have the Democrat in power but be much less accountable? Well, it turns out if the leader's a lot less accountable, they're going to do far fewer public goods. So even though you're in some sense benefiting because you like the Democratic agenda more than the Republican agenda, you're still not going to be as well off as you would be having a leader who has to work much harder to stay in power. And so that's the basic. It's better to be on the losing side in a democracy than the winning side when democracy is undermined, when public goods are easy to produce and leaders are very accountable. So that's sort of the way I like to think about it. I think about how many people stormed the Capitol in January, right? And it was a few thousand people. It was not, I didn't see the army go and join them. I didn't see the police force join them. I didn't see the masses in DC go, yeah, this is something I want to get behind. Even though many of the people may have been Republicans, I didn't see the mass of Republicans join that motion. People were pretty appalled, and I think people would go, yeah, even though it's my side and I would like my side to stay in power, I prefer to have the institutions of democracy and live under Biden than have a coup under Trump. And that's, I think, at the end of the day, people will only allow the erosion of political institutions to a certain amount, because it's better to be the loser under the Democrats than the winner under an unaccountable Republican president. I mean, I'm thinking for Republicans here.
I mean, if we were talking in 2021 or 2022, I would absolutely agree with you. I see January 6th as actually a heroic day for our institutions. I mean, the story has still not been told that Mike Pence heroically, at great personal cost, at great cost to his ambitions, ensured the peaceful transition of power and is despised by everyone for it, but he was a martyr to the republic. And they went back to work. It's just an amazing. I mean, there should be like country songs and patriotic songs about that day. However, we have a different ball game now.
The thing that what worries me perhaps the most about where Trump has been eroding institutions is in the ability him to pack the judiciary is probably what worries me more than anything else.
Yeah.
At some level, the ability to have judges rule in your favor on electoral issues
Mm-hmm.
is what's going to start eroding institutions. And things like demanding that Texas redistricts, such that, we're gerrymandering. So it's more, so we now have the case that the politicians pick the voters rather than the voters pick the politicians.
Mm-hmm.
And as we make it more and more districts less competitive, then I worry about that a lot more than I worry about we're going to take over Greenland or we're going to make Canada the next state. I think those are, I think from Trump's perspective, that he does these outrageous things that we're all like up in arms about, while at the same time, no one's paying attention to impacting the judiciary and, manipulating things at the state level, which I think is a much more worrying concern.
It does seem hard to say that democracy is over or, life support, since the last major election we had was determined to be free and fair. So as long as people are going to the polls now, you can argue, as you said, democracy is a fluid term, but you can say there are already kind of hedges on the Electoral College. There are hedges on or anti-democratic institutions already in place. There's the quasi cheating of gerrymandering that we're now seeing even more floridly in Texas. But let's stipulate that the 2024 election was free and fair, as free and fair as we get. We haven't yet seen an election that we would look at and say, oh, that's one of those Russian elections where Putin gets 75% of the vote no matter what, and it's open and shut in an hour. There's some creeping idea that it might be that in the midterms if Texas gets its way. Now we're in this arms race about gerrymandering between California and Texas. Those are all anti-democratic mechanisms that we just don't want to see happening, that are, that make it look like something is going really wrong. But I want to take something separate from the judiciary and from even the hedges on democracy that you see at the level of voting and talk about just the lies. So when you were talking about people wanting goods and services from their government and putting pressure on the government to get those, as opposed to the corruption that it takes someone, in North Korea to serve the 100 people around him, the kind of stuff he wrote about in Dictator's Handbook, that requires, I think, an investment in certain material realities of the world, like increasingly not seeing in public discourse. I mean, we're seeing what I think of as this science fictional order, where people are much more eager to see the lizard people punished who run a cabal of pedophiles than they are to see infrastructure fixed in their towns. This is something Yuval Harari is. So we're like distancing ourselves so much from reality and truth in an almost preposterous way that it's really getting harder for political scientists to see what constitutes power or what constitutes, like, we're becoming increasingly unhealthy with the spread of measles because of the lies, by our HHS secretary.
These are bad policies.
Yeah.
I think getting rid of vaccination is a bad policy. Tariffs, I think, are a bad policy. They might appear popular, but we're going to see that I suspect these policies are going to deliver for the average American very badly. Prices are going to go up, jobs are going to go down, people are going to be sick. And then, democracy is really a battle for ideas. It's a battle for who has the best public policy solutions. And the Democrats did a very bad job at offering any policy solutions at the last election. There was way too much sort of gender and identity politics that just wasn't that appealing to most people who were interested in
Well,
inflation, the cost of living, and Trump at least promised that. And I think he will fail to deliver because tariffs are not going to help one way or another. And I don't think any of his things are going to bring back manufacturing to the United States. And presumably, when these policies fail, then he's going to be very unpopular.
okay. I mean, to be fair, the Harris campaign did not focus on race and gender. It just didn't. She almost never brought it up. And the Economist in October, God, is it October a year ago, had that the American economy was the envy of the world on the cover.
Mhm.
Biden really, there was public investment like never before. There were tens of thousands of completed infrastructure projects across the country. It was bread and butter as much as we've seen from any president, way more than Obama, probably more than Bill Clinton. So if we're caring about bread and butter things, Biden
Mhm.
Harris, I think, pulled that off. She was at the end promising $25,000 credit for anyone who wanted to buy a house. I mean, she was all but throwing money at people to get them to pay
Mhm.
attention to their actual interests. While the Trump campaign was making much of four trans girls playing on the boys team or
Right.
whatever, the reverse, in middle school sports. So they focused on these hot button issues. I mean,
But
Trump had
that's not
really
how, I
great.
don't think that's the perception that much of the electorate had. It may
Yeah, but
be,
that's
I agree. I was very
the
happy with Biden.
surprise
I thought
thing. There's
Biden was a safe pair of hands. I didn't think he was particularly exciting, but he did a lot of, as you say, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of things got done in a constructive manner. But the Democrats were very bad at publicizing those gains, and the Republicans were very bad at pushing people to think about other issues. So I think it's on the Democrats to find a better way of marketing the policies that they have for people.
okay. So when we get to away from material reality of the consequences of policy, so let's say a built bridge, or
Mhm.
a steady dollar, or low unemployment, and wages growing, all the things that Biden did deliver, and
Mhm.
was increasingly delivering, and they took the time to say every 12 Nobel Prize winners, 8, 10, said that Trump's plan for the economy was terrible, their plan for the economy was great, and this should have been showing up in people's houses, and was. So you heard from a lot of voters whose lives were pretty good on all the metrics that political science cares about, but were voting for Trump on for outrageous reasons, like that he said he'd make IVF free, or that that Kamala Harris had slept her way to the top, or kind of weird stuff like that, and up to and including all kinds of occult stuff about how vaccines caused chemtrails, right? So like people are talking in this insane way. If they need, in that cultural space, in the kind of superstructure world, the marketing world, as you say, if they need to be engaged to pay attention to their material interests, but it can't be done by just saying, look, inflation's going down. Here's how the economy works. Here's what's going to happen. Here's $25,000. If none of that is sexy enough to interest them, and instead this sci-fi world, and I keep calling it that because it's so outrageous to hear how Laura Loomer and these influencers talk about masculinity and sun tanning your testicles, that it doesn't exactly seem as though there's any room for material reality, however it's marketed, in that
I
conversation.
I think there's some element of truth that we are getting our media and our news sources from increasingly, I'm going to say, untrustworthy sources. I mean, personally, I tend to read the New York Times and the Guardian and the BBC, and I believe that they're a relatively factually accurate set of institutions that. Um, Whereas, as you point out, a lot of people are getting very fake information. How long people are willing to put up with getting fake information, I think, is the more interesting question.
That's it. That I would love to hear from you on, because you've studied dictatorships, and in dictatorships information space is closely controlled, and I'm sure there are
Mhm.
elements of sci-fi. What I usually think of kind of Pravda era propaganda is exaggerations about how well things are going in material space. So this factory is producing more than anything ever before, or training the Olympic athletes so hard with so many steroids that they make a great case for Russia. But our information space is cracked in a different way, just a proliferation of kind of culty thoughts about all different kind of things. And I don't know exactly how Trump manages to make all of it redound to, and obviously he's unpopular, he's underwater, but
Mhm.
redound to the idea that he is some divine presence that's going to lift us out of our misery, even though, yeah. So when do people get tired of stuff like that? Like, when has it happened in past dictatorships that people have just started to say, I know what is coming out of Pyongyang is bullshit? Um,
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a big difference between a dictatorship and a democracy. So the reason you may know that everything is complete lies that the leader's saying in an autocracy, but you just go along with it because while you're on the inside, you are fabulously wealthy, and the average North Korean is starving hungry. So if you're living in a luxury apartment building and you have a lovely varied diet and lots of recreational activities as one of the few elites in Pyongyang,
mm,
you are not going to, even if you know this is complete craziness, you have an incentive to go along. So I think of lots of sort of cults of personality are actually just ways of finding out who's really loyal, who's willing to do ridiculous, crazy, stupid things to appease my ego, because the
mhm,
people who are willing to do that are going to be loyal, and use a way of weeding out people who aren't going to be sycophants towards you. I don't think anybody necessarily believes any of these things, but everyone has incentives to go along with them. In a democracy, it's much harder to do that. We see people taking positions against Trump. Well, as you said, Mike Pence took a particularly important stand. Not all of the court rulings have gone the way that Trump wants them to go.
mhm,
I am worried that the judiciary is being packed, but the Supreme Court isn't rubber stamping every single decision that he makes.
yep,
There are limitations in the court, and people are going to stand up to him. I mean, he's been very good at targeting anyone who stands up against him.
mhm,
The universities are a great example of this. So he's gone after the universities, and to a large extent, the universities have been trying to keep their head down. In fact, I would have to say I'm less than enamored with my own institutions sort of flip on the policies agenda that they were pushing because they don't want to put their head up the parapet and be the next one that Trump goes after. I think if universities can't take a stance of academic freedom and teaching what we think is the appropriate things,
mhm,
then we're at a very sad stage. But Harvard has
mhm,
taking on the Trump administration. People have made compromises with the government, but they haven't completely turned over the teaching agenda to the Trump administration.
mhm,
I'm a little annoyed that I would have hoped that universities would have had more of a backbone. Most of these places are wealthy, and yeah, we're talking, let's say $500 million. That's a lot of money, but you know, Harvard's got 40, 50 billion in endowment. So if they have to run down a few billion for the next 4 years, to me that seems like a would have been a good investment, rather than making a compromise. I'm at a poorer university, so maybe that's why we're trying to keep our head down. But if it's but Trump's been very good at anyone who stands up just becomes in the crosshairs for him, and so everybody's been avoiding standing up and vocally issuing dissent. But
mhm,
I don't think that's going to last forever. And I think when people start to desert him, when people do desert, when regime change takes place, it often, not in meaning that the president is we're gonna change the political institutions, but when Trump is no longer this godlike figure for the Republican Party, I think it will happen very quickly. It's everyone will be loyal when the expectation is that Trump is going to be ruling the party. The moment people perceive that Trump won't have this larger than life presence in the Republican Party, everything will flip. So, when we see a regime about to change, everybody's loyal, but people are loyal because they're expecting this flow of goods to keep coming. So this is rather than I gave you something yesterday. In politics, it's what are you going to do for me today? What are you going to do for me tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
And it's this flow of goods that people are expecting. So long as you expect Trump to be able to provide a flow of goods for a long time, that is, control the policy agenda, then you're willing to go along with him. The moment you think that that flow is going to come to an end,
Mm-hmm.
then you no longer have any interest in supporting him. So this is what we see, in the sort of collapse of autocratic regimes. They collapse very quickly, and often, everything seems fine. Everything seems fine. Then we suddenly see people see that the flow of goodies is coming to an end, and then everybody flips instantly. I thought the people were shocked at how quickly Afghanistan collapsed once the
Mm-hmm.
Biden administration, it became clear that the US were pulling out. Well, it collapsed overnight almost. We had those terrible pictures of people scrambling to get on planes at the airport. It collapsed so quickly because who wants to be the guy fighting for a regime that is not going to be in power in a week's time? I don't want
Right.
to be the guy who gets shot for an institution that's going to be dead and gone, and I'm not going to be rewarded in any way. I'll be punished for having done so. So everybody will flip, and I suspect that when the flip comes, it will come quickly. As Trump gets towards the end of his term, he's going to have much less influence going forward, and I suspect that the Republicans will start standing up and thinking about what messages do they have for their voters and supporters.
So what tell me about goodies, because
Mhm.
I I mean, Trump seems more to operate on extortion and blackmail than on bribes and handouts and goodies. But
Mhm.
maybe those are just two sides of a coin. But for instance, like the contracts to Elon Musk, yeah, tell me how you read the breakdown of that particular relationship between Trump and Musk, since that's probably close to something you've seen in dictatorships, right? Like the oligarchs around Putin, or some of the,
Mhm.
just some of the rich around a Xi or Kim Jong Un.
Well, I mean, it's sort of very interesting. When leaders first come to power, we often see a lot of turnover in like who's the important insiders. So, Musk was for the first few months a central figure within the regime, and now
Hmm.
he's out. So there's a lot of sifting through to find out who you like and who you don't like.
Hmm.
It's much less important in democracies because relatively few of the goods are handed out in sort of private goods as graft and corruption.
Hmm.
But it's super important when you're an autocrat, right? We see, Fidel Castro comes to power. He's fought this revolutionary fight with all these people fighting in the bush with him. What happens to all of the people who were like his cronies, the loyal guard? They brought down the government. They came power. Two-thirds of them are dead within a year, and the rest are jailed somewhere else. We see this
Hmm.
big turnover. We just don't tend to see these turnovers mattering as much. So I mean, I like to think of, we could think of Democrats and Republicans, but I like to think about what is it that, what are the people offering? The Republicans are offering lower taxes and fewer services to poor people, right? And who are there? Disproportionately, rich people vote Republican. We're shifting resources, we're taxing the poor to give to the rich. And when the Democrats are in, they tax the rich to give to the poor. I think, because we're in a democracy, the extent to which we're pushing resources from one group to another is extremely mild. I mean, I suspect that your personal economic life, my personal economic life, has been very little changed by the change in the presidency. I mean, I'm not significantly better off or significantly worse off. I mean, I don't like some of the things that are going on, but in a material sense, there's very little changes because there are relatively few goods that are in sort of favoring one group over another. It's really, in a democracy, we got to keep the whole country running. You can't, so the policies can't be too deep.
But both of us are in institutions, as my colleague Stephen Metcalf says, that are the sort of the typical, the historically traditional truth founding institutions. So you're an academic, I'm a journalist. So journalism, academia, the courts, our science are the ways that we have of settling on truth. And all of them have had their authority shaken by Trump. I mean, I think this, it's terrible to call it an assault on truth, but one is definitely more embattled. You say, has my life materially changed? I mean, it's been, what are we, almost 10 years of trying to get some clarity on what's happening in our country for me in my work. And that has been punctuated by periods of death threats. And, the FBI was never involved in my life before Trump, and it has been involved in my life since. And I never expected that. I mean, and I'm hardly on the fringes. I'm sort of saying mainline democracy is preferable to autocracy. And the efforts to shake my confidence come from lots of different directions. And you have to have rhinoceros skin to be able to endure being spited by Tucker Carlson or having your appearance picked over here and there. But whatever, we go on. But then you have people
Mhm.
like E. Jean Carroll, Kathy Griffin, Christine Blasey Ford, who are having to move house, hire private security at great expense, endure no end of death threats and credible threats that the FBI come and look at. And we like forget about the Mike Pompeos and the Dr. Fauci's
Mhm.
in these institutions whose lives are completely changed because the authority of our institutions is being shaken, and we're now considered liars and handmaidens to orcs or whatever is the recent sci-fi villain of choice. And that has been, in some cases, actually costly for people, but has also set up a ripple of fear that affects people, I think, everywhere. Some idea that if you get off sides of Trump or MAGA, that you're going to be in serious trouble. I mean, people running for office up where I live, where there are lots of Republicans and Democrats, get hounded out of the races if they get in. I mean, there's a guerrilla effect that somehow has Trump at the top of it that has made life quite a bit more difficult, I think, for people sort of up and down income levels. And all of this is happening in information space, I guess is my point.
I mean, I think some really interesting things you've just mentioned there that we should think about. First of all, we should be vocally opposing the plans that Trump are making, and we are facing costs from doing this, but it's really important that we do continue to protest. There are other things you said that make me very reassured, like, the fact that the FBI, I'm very sorry to hear that you had to get the FBI involved, but the fact that the FBI are involved and they are taking your position, they're not coming to have you arrested as the perceived troublemaker. I mean, that's a very important policy here, that law enforcement is actually coming to your aid. Now, I would much prefer that we don't have to do this, but it's very important that these institutions do still function. The US is, I confess, that Second Amendment thing sort of has given my European perspective and my
Yeah,
upbringing. I'm just like, every European thinks we're nuts with all the guns,
yeah,
but that's, be that as it may, we've all woken up and realized, God, what a dick I was the night before. But we don't shoot anybody if
right.
you don't have a gun. Accidents happen with guns, and
Yeah.
so this does make some of these threats much more real. Um, The other thing that when you were talking, it really made me focus was thinking about some of the stuff that Richard Kapuscinski used to write about
Mm.
silence. This idea that silence is actually the problem. He very florid writer, so it's just beautiful. But he just crafts this idea that when we're hearing nothing is the time that everything has gone wrong. And I
Yeah.
think that things haven't gone wrong because people are up there making statements. And yes, they are being attacked for this. And there are some very serious consequences for a few number of people. But it's not like the institutions of government are having people arrested for voicing their opinion. And I think it's really important that we don't have silence. That
I,
self censorship is how things go. That's how that the moment we fully buy into self censorship, I think we're in real trouble.
yeah, I mean, that seems right. I mean, like, as you say that, I think, well, Kathy Griffin, E. Jean Carroll won her lawsuit against Donald Trump and now has a bestseller out about it. This would not happen in Russia. And both of them have flourishing Substacks. And I haven't stopped for a second. At the same time, I mean, and I think I agree with you there. I can imagine another version of me that would push you and say, well, the FBI, and incidentally, that was Biden's FBI. That was Biden's FBI that helped me out. But now we have ICE arresting people and shutting
Yeah.
out foreign students, which I'm sure has had some effect on you for thought crimes and exercise of speech, peaceful disobedience, and um, you know, we could somehow say it's not so bad, but the test cases, it's like each one of these, Mahmoud Khalil and so on, would be a full-fledged Oscar-winning movie about the mistreatment of someone in this undemocratic way, except that they're happening all the time now. Just things that are unthinkable. People getting taken away by masked men on the streets for writing editorials. I mean,
I,
so something is
I mean, one important thing we should make is the target of ICE are not political supporters of the Trump administration. By definition, they're people who don't get to vote, so they
right.
can't be
That's
supporters.
right.
It's the ability, the Trump administration, to the best of my knowledge, has not systematically been able to detain people who can vote in US elections. Now, don't get me wrong, I think this policy is absolutely terrible. And I think that it was something that was popular because Trump found a narrative that people are doing economically badly because their jobs have been taken by immigrant workers, which I just don't think is true. They've been taken by machines, or those jobs have gone to places where labor costs are really low overseas, and these jobs are not coming back. But he managed to find a bogeyman, and then people have bought into this narrative. But I think as it goes on, and we don't have people to stock the shelves, we don't have in New York restaurants don't function as well as they used to because there's just staff isn't there anymore.
Mhm.
People can't find babysitters, caregivers, gardeners. I think when those realities hit people, they become less enamored with the policy, especially when the jobs. It's not like ICE have been rounding people up, and manual laborers are suddenly getting paid $10 an hour more. There's been
Mhm.
they will get paid more because there's less competition for those jobs, but it's not gonna be such a big difference. And there are other people who, I'm an immigrant to the country, so have this natural proclivity towards immigration being a wonderful thing. I would love to open the borders, and you know, it would
Me
be
too.
wonderful to have competition. Countries with the best policies and the best environment to live would be the places everybody went to, and we could get rid of autocratic governments because all the people would have left there, and they're just like there's nobody left for the country to rule. That would
Mhm.
be sort of the
Mhm.
way I'd love to deal with things. But that's obviously not what we're going to do in the United States.
I like your confidence in reality. I just that we will someday the rubber will hit the road, maybe sooner rather than later, where people see
I hope a lot sooner than later. But
where people will see, to mix metaphors, what side their bread is buttered on, and realize we can't you know my farm has to run and I can't keep voting for someone who keeps taking, keeps deporting my workers. Or well, he said he'd get me free IVF and he didn't. That was a lie. And now I don't have that IVF. Very specifically, just look down at your world and say, is this the world he promised me? And that there might be some hard material reality that confounds whatever kind of crazy thoughts you had going into voting for Trump. And I'm inclined, as someone trained as a literary critic, I'm inclined to see culture as maybe in serious competition with material reality, if not, more than giving it a run for its money. But let me try to understand more. What is political science currently? What does political science address itself to that is somehow more real than what a cultural critic takes on? Why is
Yeah,
political science a science? Tell me that.
well, it's probably a useful starting place. You may actually think tons of political scientists are very politically engaged people, but I would actually say that most political scientists are actually, many of us are very apolitical. We
Mm-hmm.
don't have strong. I'm a very middle of the road type of person, and what we really like to do is we want to understand how the machine works.
Yeah.
So, we think about people who, take radios apart or take dishwashers apart and just put them back together because they want to understand how they work. And so I think you should think of political scientists as being that person who wants to tinker. They want to open the case and find out what goes on under the hood and then put it back. And we're interested. I'm very interested if we change. I'm what we would call an institutionalist. I am very much into how institutions, like, if we change the rules, if we have open primaries versus closed primaries, how does that affect which candidates get selected by which parties? How's this going to affect which policies get? So, I'm very much interested in tinkering and understanding how we change the rule.
Mm-hmm.
If you get defeated, in some states, if you lose a primary, you can't then run as an independent, prohibited from doing. So things like changing those rules, what's the effect? What's the effect of redistricting by some sort of arbitrary mathematical rule versus allowing the winning party to pick the districts that they want to have? Those are the kind of questions that
I
many
like
political scientists are interested in. We want to know how the machine works. Some of us are much more political activists than I am. I'm
that.
not very activist at all. And they actually they want to know how the machine runs so they can actually make policy changes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But many of us we just like mechanics. We want to know how the car works.
And if then, I think it seems like the sort of if then, the mechanism that broadly interests you most is what has to happen maybe to defeat institutions or what has to happen to maintain them. And I'm just guessing. And it seems like the argument of your work is that a lot has to happen. A lot more in a mature democracy. A lot more has to happen to defeat institutions in a mature democracy than has happened yet in the United States.
I think that's the conclusion I have come to. There are almost no examples of economically competitive, functional democracies not becoming democracies. Absent Nazi Germany invaded a bunch of countries and got
Mm-hmm.
rid of institutions. But absent those mechanisms, domestically, we just don't see cases where mature, functioning democracies that are economically productive have gone backwards. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Now, just being economically mature doesn't necessarily mean you're going to become a democracy. That's a harder step, but I think we
Mm-hmm.
move in that direction. So I'm optimistic, but again, this is from my sort of opening the box and trying to think about what's
Yeah.
going on in this political box and how do institutions work. And a lot of the evidence I have is that the theoretical arguments, we don't have that many test cases for whether how easy it is to undermine democracy, but lots of the other predictions from the argument and the theory are borne out. And
Mm-hmm.
so you can hopefully, when it turns out you've got evidence for large portions of the argument, I feel somewhat confident thinking that maybe the argument has some validity, and therefore we can extrapolate a little bit to what are the implications in other situations. Anyway,
It does.
I'm gonna keep my fingers crossed,
I
and
love it.
I'm
Mine are,
hoping that I'm right.
but I really like your idea that reality reasserts itself, but partly also the people reassert themselves, because if there are 22 million of us not getting stuff, we do go to the streets, we do go to the polls, we answer pollsters who call with the question of, do you approve or disapprove of this president? We answer with a resounding disapprove. And Trump cares about that. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics shows what's actually happening in the world, and that ultimately there's a system that rallies and that starts telling itself the truth again and votes.
Right, and I think that at the end of the day is the proof will be in the pudding. I think that the policies, the Trump administration's policies, just don't seem to be helping the critical 22 million voters he would need. I mean, there's no practical way he's actually going to have a third term, but to be this influential figure going forward, I think the policies are just not working. Inflation is going to come up. I was just reading just before I came on. He's trying to get rid of the trying to get rid of the Fed chair again. This is one of these terrible things that we love having independent central bank, because independent central bank means we don't have rampant inflation. There's this classic business cycle stuff is the president wants to pump up the economy before the election. Everybody knows he's pumping up the economy. So there's just a lot of foam on top of the economy for relatively little real improvement.
Yep.
And so we have all the bad effects and very mild positive effects for the president. And so the independent central bank was a good piece of public policy because it took that frothing up the economy before elections out of the president's hands. It's a great example of, I think, shooting himself in the foot. The mere fact that he's trying to bring monetary policy back under his control. If the markets start to believe that, the Fed actually, to keep inflation under control, actually has to have exactly the policies he's against. And that's an even tighter monetary policy, because if we have to stamp out inflationary expectations, he's actually, unless he actually does get rid of the Fed chair and put his cronies in, he's actually going to end up with policies that are actually going to be counterproductive to him, which is sort of, he's going to force the Fed to be tighter than they would have had to be if people didn't expect more inflation.
Yeah. So these responses, the levers, there's hydraulics here. Like the system doesn't just go and move in one direction. There's pushback all through the mechanisms.
I mean, I love Jerome Powell. He just said, "No, I'm not stepping down. He doesn't have the authority to get rid of me."
Yeah.
And I think financial markets will tumble if the president tries to remove the Fed chair.
Thank you so much for being here, Alastair. You have kindled hope in me. I'm not even going to cross my fingers, because that suggests it's superstition. This is hope grounded in science.
Generally, I like to think the arguments I make are grounded in logic and evidence. And, it's nice to be right, but it's really important as a scientist that you make predictions that can be proven wrong. And when they're not proven wrong, then you get more confidence in your argument. And that's sort of the basis of doing science. But on this particular issue, I really actually, not just because I like the argument and I think it makes a lot of sense, we have something vested in this one being right.
All right. Thanks again for being here. I hope you'll
come
back.
My pleasure. All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Today's episode is dedicated to President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine for reasons that need no spelling out. But I mean, that's it. I have no more words, but I can't believe he continues to meet with the American president and stand up with so much dignity and ferocity for his country. What Rough Beast was created by me, Virginia Heffernan, and Stephen Metcalf. Richard Stanislaw and Brianna Snyder produced the show. Joel Patterson was the founding producer. John Jeremiah Sullivan recorded our theme song, Je dis ce que je pense et je vis comme je veux, which was originally written and recorded by the French pop star Antoine. Subscribe to the show at whatroughbeastpod.com or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Virginia Heffernan. On behalf of the What Rough Beast team, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time on What Rough Beast. Okay, wicked.